many, many times, and I'm hopeful again, but I'll be even more hopeful when I see little kids' lives getting better.
Tonight, Hope and Skepticism, an emergency meeting on child welfare, wraps up in Ottawa. And Pee-wee hockey teams from across Canada are fighting it out for the cup, but the winner of this cup will be doing a good deed for their favorite charity. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. A 2-day so-called emergency meeting on child welfare has come to an end in Ottawa. Government officials are happy with the outcomes. But as Dennis Ward reports, not everyone is going home feeling changes will come.
The commodification of our children and our families needs to stop.
Jocelyn Wabano-Iatale was leery coming into the 2-day conference on child welfare, and she's not heading home feeling much better.
Because I know that the Millennium Scoop is ongoing, and because I know that our children who fall under the Jordan's principle are still falling through the cracks, the promises that have been made are not being followed through.
Wabano-Iatale also feels grassroots people were left out of the gathering.
That's quite a disappointment, because I am well aware of the fact that there were many who wanted to attend. This was very secret, is what it seemed to many of us. And they weren't even given an ample opportunity to attend. As well, a lot of our youth were not permitted to attend.
But those who did take part and pulled the meeting together are optimistic about what was discussed. Plans to address root causes and early prevention. Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott says work will get underway on community-based solutions.
That, of course, the safety of those children is critical. But children can be safe with their aunt. They can be safe with their grandma. They can be safe in community, in a program of kinship care. So let's not use safety as an excuse to extract children from their culture.
Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Carolyn Bennett hopes that after this meeting, agencies will ask if there is anything else that can be done other than apprehending the child. Bennett says there should be no more apprehensions because there are not enough bedrooms.
So let's just be real about the racism and discrimination that is going on in these decisions that are being taken, and it just has to stop.
First Nations child advocate Cindy Blackstock says there were some good conversations over the last 2 days, but adds there's been good conversations over the last 50 years. The federal government was ordered to end inequality for First Nations children 2 years ago today, and not in the next budget.
I've been hopeful many, many times, and I'm hopeful again, but I'll be even more hopeful when I see little kids' lives getting better. That's my measure of success. It always will be.
Dennis Ward, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still in Ottawa, APTN's Todd Lamarand was also at the emergency meeting today. He's standing by with a guest. Todd?
Thank you. I'm here now with National Chief Perry Bellegarde. Now, Perry, after 2 days, I've heard different things. Some people want more action, and this is just more words. Others have said, hey, first time in years, I see some hope now. What's your gut feeling after 2 days of these meetings?
Well, I think we always say you try to provide more hope than when you came into the room. So again, it's a humanitarian crisis. It's a human crisis. It's a human rights crisis, the number of First Nations children in care across Canada. And you've got to fix almost like 3 systems. One is the federal government system, and they have to end the discrimination against First Nation children on reserve through inadequate funding and resources being there. So the federal budget's coming up, so we're going to look for adequate resources there to end discrimination, as per the 3 binding decisions from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision. So that's one piece. And then we've got 40,000 children in care right across Canada, in every province and every territory. So I look to see, well, how are those provinces and territories, provincial governments, working with First Nations leadership to fix and overhaul that system that's there? So it's almost like you need 13 trilateral processes or 13 bilats with First Nations involved to fix that system that's there. And that's what I was looking for to come out of this, is that the commitments that First Nations and premiers and ministers in every province and territory will work together in partnership with the federal government as well to overhaul the systems that aren't working together. So you've got these systems that aren't working together. They're not communicating. They got to share data. They got to look at case management. They got to look at cross-cultural training. But the objective is to fix it now for the children that are there and keep the children at home in their families and communities. That's the objective. While we work towards First Nations jurisdiction, while we work towards the nation-to-nation relationship, and that First Nations will develop their own law, their own First Nations Child and Family Services Agreement and law, right? That's where we need to keep working, but at the same time, there are things that can happen now. And so I indicated that the premiers came together 2 years ago at the Council of the Federation, and they said this was the #1 priority. I, as National Chief, will hold the premiers as well to account at the upcoming Council of the Federation in a respectful way, because this is children. And if you can fix it now, you are going to save billions of dollars in the years in terms of costs on the education system, the healthcare system, the justice system, the social wellness system. All those costs will come down if you get it right now. And so it's a start, but there's a lot of work to do.
Okay, thank you, National Chief. Back to you in the studio.
And Alberta chiefs held their own press conference while at the emergency meeting today. They expressed what one speaker said was deep, cautious optimism about the possible outcome of the gathering, but that going forward means respecting treaties and Indigenous law.
We are concerned that the outcome for the...
That means non-interference from Indian affairs with policy, with law that's getting in the way. It's really, I've heard one of the elders speaking about, it's not the drugs, the alcohol, the suicide, the violence that's killing the people. What's destroying the people is the policy and the laws, because they're not ours.
It seems now there's a political will that's also there. The rights framework is also there. There seems to be an initiative to a recognition of rights as a framework to go forward.
The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls has been in Yellowknife this week. Over 40 families and survivors testified over 3 days of community hearings. Charlotte Mork-Jacobs reports.
Tears. She never got to meet my kids. Anger.
The RCMP didn't do a good enough job.
And healing.
Getting deeper, the answers there.
Families and survivors of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across the NWT testified, listened, and supported at community hearings this week. Lisa Semler testified on behalf of her mother, who was murdered by her partner. Semler spoke towards the difficulties faced by families of MMIWG taking on relatives who have lost their mothers.
The families aren't going to go through the process of being foster parents, and that's how the system works, is you got to register as foster parents, and then we can give you, like, you can have these children and we can financially support you.
Jada Andre, who testified in honor of her sister who was murdered by her husband, was one of many who spoke about the need to acknowledge and intervene with acts of family violence.
He will change, and that would be the last time she would be assaulted. And
family and survivors' northern-specific recommendations were loud and clear.
We've heard about the importance of establishing appropriate memorials to honor lost loved ones.
The challenges with the turnovers in the system, not training local people. So, you know, the doctor you see one day is not the one you see in 2 weeks or next month. Those are challenges. But to get the education to be the one that provides that service, you don't get it here. You have to leave your territory.
With delays in staff turnover, public perception of the inquiry has not always been favorable. Commissioner Michelle Odette addressed part of this by calling upon media to stop focusing on commissioners.
A message to the media. Come on, we need you. Forget about what's going on at the inquiry. We'll talk about the extension, don't worry. But family first. Come on, help me.
Inquiry hearings will move to Rankin Inlet Nunavut next on February 20th for 3 days of hearings. Charlotte Mork-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
The trial into the killing of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine begins on Monday. It was a death that shocked the nation and renewed calls for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The teen's body was pulled from a Winnipeg river in August 2014. She was in the care of Child and Family Services when she went missing earlier that month. In December 2015, police charged 53-year-old Raymond Cormier with second-degree murder in her death. The second-degree murder trial for the man accused of killing Colton Bushy begins Monday in Battleford, Saskatchewan. It was on this farm near Biggar, Saskatchewan, where Bushy was fatally shot in August 2016. Gerald Stanley, who owns the farm, is accused of killing 22-year-old Bushy, who is from the Red Pheasant Cree Nation. Jury selection starts this Monday. Chiefs from Treaty 8 and landowners along the Peace River gathered in Victoria today to kick off a two-day summit on the controversial Site C Dam. Despite approval from the federal and provincial government, First Nations are still continuing to fight against the project. APTN's Tina House has this from the legislature in Victoria.
Thank you. Yes, we're here on the front lawn of the BC Legislature, and joining me today is Chief Roland Wilson of the Moberly Lake First Nation. Chief, what are we doing here today?
We came down, myself, Chief Dakosa from Prophet River, and Mr. Boone, Ken Boone from the Bear Valley, Bear Flats in the Peace River Valley came down today to return the yellow stakes that Premier Horgan, Minister Lana Popham, and Minister George Heyman purchased through the Yellow Stakes campaign to save the Peace River and give them their money back. During their election campaign, they made promises to the people that if they got elected, that they would send the BCUC, send Site C to the BCUC, the British Columbia Utilities Commission, where it should have went in the first place. And if it came back that it was unfavorable for British Columbia, that they would cancel the project. And the report came back. They sent it to the BCUC. It came back and stated that it's not a good deal for BC, and they approved it anyways. So we brought the checks and we brought the stakes. We put the stakes in the ground here, and we don't want their broken promises.
Absolutely. What's next for you in fighting this project? I know you've been involved in the courts trying to get this project taken off the books, but now the BC government and the federal government have approved it. What's next for your community?
Well, we filed an injunction to try and stop the project. We also have filed a civil claim on this. Part of the process that we went through before was court cases were about process and consultation. And this is the first chance that we've had to get in front of the courts and talk about treaty infringement. This is Treaty 8 territory. We've stated that we're not opposed to development. What we're opposed to is the unnecessary destruction of that valley. The alternatives package, wind, solar, geothermal, much better option. We were all in favor of that. We wanted to sit down and talk to them with that, and they refused to have that discussion. The Liberal government refused, and we thought we'd get somewhere with the new NDP government based on their promises to everybody, and here we are, back down here having to do this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today, and back to you in studio.
Coming up after the break, we chat with APTN Investigates John Murray about his latest episode, The Children Taken Away. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. +2 in Halifax, +1 in Charlottetown, sunny and -12 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, -18 in Nain, cloudy skies in Quebec, +5 in Montreal, +3 in Val-d'Or, snowy parts in Ontario, +5 in Ottawa and Peterborough, +7 in Windsor, -3 in Thunder Bay, -7 in Sioux Lookout. In northern Manitoba, sunny and -22 in Flin Flon, -21 in the Pas, a snowy -8 in Barons River, -12 in Winnipeg. In Saskatchewan, -14 in Regina, -15 in North Battleford, -22 in La Ronge, and a chilly -25 in Stony Rapids. Thunder Bay's police chief will be back to work Monday. Chief J.P. Levesque was suspended last May when he was charged with obstructing justice and breach of trust. On Thursday, he was found not guilty. In a closed meeting Friday morning, the police board voted unanimously to revoke Levesque's suspension. Board Chair Jackie Dojak said the court's ruling on Thursday clearly exonerated Levesque.
Board members individually have had people come to them yesterday saying, this is a wonderful decision for the chief, but they've also talked about how important this decision is for the city and the reputation of the city. And so, we're all feeling really good for going forward for the reputation of the city and the reputation of the police as part of that.
Tonight on APTN Investigates, the story of 60 Scoop $800 million proposed settlement. Reporter John Murray's documentary, The Children Taken Away, will air right after the news. Thanks for joining us today, John. Some of your viewers may not know, what is the 60 Scoop?
Well, decades ago, as the residential school system was winding down, the child welfare system started to become a bigger thing. And what was happening was Indigenous children were literally being scooped out of their homes and being adopted by non-Indigenous families. Some of them went as far away as the United States, Canada, and even as far away as New Zealand and Great Britain.
How does your episode of APTN Investigates look into this?
Well, we spoke to some of these survivors, especially the survivors who were left out. Non-status and Métis were not included in the agreement in principle that was announced in October of last year.
I understand there are very recent developments in the settlement that did not make it into your edition of APTN Investigates. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, just this last weekend, the agreement in principle was released to the public. So Scoop survivors were able to read that, and included with that was instructions on how to apply for this settlement. And some of the things that they have to do in order to access this settlement is they either have to agree to it and just wait for it to be approved, or they can object, which means they have to fill out a form, send it off, and if they want to be in court, they have to request to be in court. Or the other thing they can do is they can opt out of the settlement altogether and not get any of the settlement money. Now, the court settlement is expected May 30th. That is the last day of court, and many survivors are confused as to what does it mean. Are they giving up rights? And there's a lot of confusion there. And as well, not everyone agrees about it. There's 4 law firms that are exclusive to the settlement, and they think it's a good deal. But there is another law firm, D.D. West, that doesn't think it's a good deal, and they vow to do anything they can do to stop it.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Looking forward to seeing that.
All right. Thank you.
Time for a quick break, but first the rest of Saturday's weather. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, -22 in Fort Chipewyan and High Level, -17 in Grand Prairie, cloudy and -15 in Calgary, -8 in Medicine Hat, over to the west coast, 10 above in Victoria, -6 in Quesnel, -5 in Smithers, a sunny -19 in Dease Lake, a cold day in Yukon, -27 in Beaver Creek, -16 in Dawson City, over to NWT, -23 in Wrigley, -28 in Yellowknife, -27 and sunny in Colville Lake, -27 in Sax Harbor, sunny and cold in Nunavut, -28 in Will Cove, -27 in Repulse Bay, -29 in Clyde River, -25 in Resolute. Acclaimed actress Michelle Thrush is in the final days of performing her newest play. Tamara Pimentel met up with Thrush to find a deeper meaning behind Inner Elder.
You know that place inside of you where you connect with a woman that looks like you and teaches you things about yourself. That place was empty.
In the one-woman show Inner Elder, Michelle Thrush takes the audience on a journey of discovery through her own personal experiences.
It's my life, it's my truth. It's about growing up in Calgary, never really feeling like I fit in, being, the child of alcoholics, what that meant to me.
A reality Thrush says many people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, face.
And that's me learning how to create a new cycle for my daughters so that when they become parents, they will have even less to deal with than I did growing up.
She says this story is a vulnerable one to tell, but it's done so using comedy. as she transforms from young to old, exploring her inner elder.
We all carry our own inner elders, and she's part of that for me. She's the one that, you know, when things get really crazy in my life, I try and find comedy, and I try and find things to be grateful for, and all of that to me is accessing my inner elder. I believe that when we come into this world, we spend the rest of our lives building an elder inside so that we can answer those tough questions in life and do it with dignity and grace the way our old people do it.
You see, this was way before Aboriginal People's Television Network or Dances with Wolves.
Inner Elder is part of Calgary's International Festival of the Arts and runs until this Saturday. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
A group of young hockey players from northern Manitoba are now semi-finalists in a nationwide contest. For a second year in a row, 10 Pee-wee hockey teams from across Canada are battling it out for the Cup. The Good Deeds Cup, that is. Chevrolet and Hockey Canada have teamed up to put on the contest, which will see one lucky team awarded $15,000 for their charity of choice. Jerome Conatee is the assistant coach of the Huskies in the Paw. They are one of the 10 finalists and the only team from the Prairies competing.
So we're a pretty small place, and we're going up against huge organizations that have, you know, tens and in some cases hundreds of thousands of people in the immediate area, multiple TV stations that are doing coverage for them, and we're in the past 2-3 days, we've been in first place and second place, just kind of going back and forth with another team from just outside Toronto.
Teams are required to make a 1-minute video advocating for their charity. The video with the most views wins the competition.
I thought that it was pretty nice, but we helped out. That's good.
The Huskies chose the local homeless shelter Oscar's Place after the team volunteered there in December.
When we decided that we were going to go and help out at the shelter, we didn't expect anything out of it. We originally had the plan to go there and just kind of get our kids involved with the shelter because it's had such a difficult time running in the past few months.
Last fall, the Paw Friendship Center announced they would be closing the shelter due to a lack of funding. Several people stepped in to form the group Stand Up for Oscar's Place. They helped fundraise to keep the shelter open. Louise Duar was one of them. She says money will go toward food and supplies.
Well, for us it would mean taking a look at buying cots, and we think that's really important because we do get some elderly gentlemen coming in here. We have one that's, I believe he's about 67, 68. He's here every night. He doesn't have a home, and he sleeps on the floor.
The contest closes January 28th. Videos can be viewed on Chevrolet Canada's YouTube page. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News. That's your APTN National News for this Friday. An all-new episode of APTN Investigates is up next. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night.